Hey everybody, it's Ron, and I want to tell you a story about business and how that story changed everything. The line at the Fairbanks, Alaska McDonald's is long. It's always long. At any hour of the day or night, the dining room is packed with people who look like they have just come in from somewhere extremely cold and extremely hard, which most of them have. Mud on their boots, grease under their fingernails. Cash in their pockets from paychecks larger than anything most of them have earned in their lives. They are welders and truckers and pipe fitters and laborers who have come from Oklahoma and Texas and Ireland and South America and every corner of the lower 48 states, and they are all here for the same reason. Nobody in this dining room is thinking about the fact that this particular McDonald's is currently the second busiest location in the entire chain in the world. They're thinking about food and sleep and their next shift. The only franchise doing more business than this one right now in the mid-1970s is a location in Stockholm, Sweden. A McDonald's in Fairbanks, Alaska is outperforming almost every other location on Earth. And the reason has nothing to do with burgers and everything to do with what is being built outside those windows. 800 miles of pipeline. $8 billion in 1970s money, the largest private construction project in American history. So how does a geopolitical crisis in the Middle East transform an oil field nobody could afford to tap into the most expensive construction project in the history of private enterprise? How does 800 miles of pipe through Arctic permafrost turn a small Alaskan city into a boomtown so intense that it takes years to recover? And how did all of that come down to July 28, 1977, when the first barrel of Prudhoe Bay oil completed its 800-mile journey and arrived at the marine terminal at Valdez, Alaska, and a geopolitical shock that began 4 years earlier finally paid out in crude? From Business Basics, I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the daily podcast where we explain the stories that changed business forever. Every date on the calendar has a story where business reshaped the world. Today, July 28th, that story takes us to 1977. $8 billion and 800 miles. The Prudhoe Bay oil field had been known about for years before anyone thought it was worth extracting. When the company Atlantic Richfield, known as ARCO, struck oil on Alaska's North Slope in March 1968, the find was extraordinary, the largest oil field ever discovered in North America, holding an estimated 10 billion barrels of crude. The problem was the price. Pre-1973, oil was cheap enough that the engineering challenge of moving Arctic crude 800 miles to a warm water port made the economics difficult to justify. The oil was there, the business case wasn't. Legal challenges compounded the problem. Alaskan Native groups whose land sat in the pipeline's path filed suits in 1970 that halted construction before it even began. Environmental groups challenged the project's impact statement. The courts worked through it slowly, and the oil companies waited. The pipeline had been announced in 1969 with the intention of moving quickly. By 1973, 4 years later, nothing had been built, and the project was stalled in a tangle of regulatory and legal opposition that showed no clear exit. Then, in October of that year, 1973, Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Israel on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar. Arab members of OPEC, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, responded to American support for Israel by cutting off oil exports to the United States and several other Western nations. The U.S. price of imported oil quadrupled within months. Gas lines formed across America. The economic logic that had made Prudhoe Bay marginal in 1968 had reversed completely, and Congress knew it. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline Authorization Act passed on November 16, 1973, clearing the legal path for construction to begin. The bill passed the U.S. Senate by one single vote. Construction began in spring of 1974, and the scale of the challenge was unlike anything American industry had attempted in a comparable setting. More than half of the 800-mile route had to be built above ground on specifically engineered supports to prevent the warm pipeline from melting the permafrost beneath it. Workers faced temperatures that dropped to 60 below zero. The pipe itself, 48 inches in diameter, 4 feet, had been fabricated in Japanese steel mills and shipped to Alaska in more than 100,000 separate pieces. Workers made 66,000 field wells across some of the most remote terrain on the continent. 31 people died in construction-related activities across the project. The human story of the construction boom resists understatement. When pipeline work began, Fairbanks, Alaska had 2 police officers on patrol. Within 2 years, the city's population had grown by 40%. The Ialaska Pipeline Service Company alone was pumping an estimated $800,000 a day into the local economy. Workers arrived from across the country, chasing wages that dwarfed anything available in the lower 48 states, and what they found was an economy that had lost its connection to normal prices entirely. Small cabins with no plumbing rented for $500 a month. One 2-bedroom house had 45 pipeline workers sharing the beds in rotating shifts. Yellow cab companies in Fairbanks reported 800% staff turnover. The police department had largely collapsed by mid-construction. Officers and state troopers had resigned in large groups to take pipeline security jobs at wages public employment couldn't match, and by 1975, the Fairbanks Police Department estimated between 40 and 175 prostitutes were working in a city of 15,000 people. By 1976, after years of strained infrastructure, spiking crime, and an economic transformation they had not chosen, 46% of Fairbanks residents said the pipeline had changed their city for the worse. The boom the McDonald's numbers suggested looked from the inside considerably more complicated. On June 20th, 1977, oil began flowing from the North Slope into the pipeline. On July 28th, 1977, the first barrel completed the 800-mile journey and arrived at the marine terminal at Valdez. The Fairbanks Daily News Miner marked the occasion with an editorial that understood exactly what the state was now holding. Alaska could nurture this wealth to build a stable future, or squander it in ways that would make the state's name synonymous with foolishness and greed. Alaska chose, at least in part, to nurture it. The Alaska Permanent Fund had been established in 1976, the year before oil began flowing, to capture a portion of the state's oil revenue and invest it for long-term benefit rather than fold it immediately into state spending. By 1982, 86.5% of Alaska's state budget came directly from the oil industry. Every Alaskan resident has received an annual dividend from the Permanent Fund ever since. One of the most direct examples of a resource-based sovereign wealth model operating inside the United States. The mechanism that made all of it possible was a price signal, not an engineering breakthrough. The oil had been sitting under the North Slope since before Alaska was a state. The pipeline technology existed. The workforce was available. What wasn't available until October 1973 was a price for oil that made the economics of extracting and moving it 800 miles through the permafrost and mountain ranges worth the effort. A geopolitical crisis in the Middle East changed a number, and that number unlocked $8 billion, more than 70,000 workers across the full project, 800 miles of pipe, and a wealth management model Alaska is still living on today. The Arab oil embargo was aimed at the United States. One of the things it built entirely by accident was a sovereign wealth fund for the people of Alaska. I'm Ron Trucks, and this is Business History, the podcast that finds the turning points behind the headlines. To hear more stories like this, follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen. And if you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to subscribe and leave a quick review. It helps more people find the story behind the business. And if you want to actually understand business better without the fluff or the buzzwords or the MBA language, start by visiting us at businessdailypodcast.com.